morning, guys. Welcome back to the channel. And I am Jen. And welcome to the True Crime Corner video. And today we're going to talk about Sherri Rasmussen. She was killed in 1985 in Los Angeles by a jealous off-duty police officer. So I'm going to start with some of her background and so forth, and then we are going to just get into that, and I will tell you more about the off-duty police officer also. On February the 24th, 1986, the body of Sherri Rasmussen was found in the apartment that she shared with her husband, John Rutan, in Van Nuys, California. She had been beaten and she was shot 3 times in a struggle. The LAPD initially considered the case a botched burglary and were unable to identify a suspect. Now, Sherri's father believed that the LAPD police officer, Stephanie Lazarus, who had maintained a relationship with Sherri's husband, was a prime suspect. So now we're going to get into the whole thing. Now, this was considered a cold case. Reasons being because they didn't have any proof that Stephanie Lazarus was the one that committed the murder. So they re-examined the cold case files in 2009, where it eventually led to Lazarus. By then, she was a detective. A DNA sample from a cup she had thrown away was matched to one from a bite that was on Rasmussen's body that had remained in the files. Now, Stephanie Lazarus was convicted of the murder in 2012 and is serving a sentence for 27 years to life in first-degree murder in prison in Corona. Now, there's some background on Stephanie, and I know I'm going all over the place today. I'm still trying to get used to doing this a new way that I've been trying to do it. She was Sherri Rasmussen was an undergrad at the University of California from 1978 to 1982. Then John Rutan, a mechanical engineer from San Diego, who occasionally dated Stephanie, and a fellow Dykstra Hall resident. They were both avid athletes. Lazarus played on the UCLA's junior varsity basketball. Lazarus would steal Rutan's clothes when he showered and took photographs of him naked while he slept. Rutan never considered the relationship as anything more than necking and fooling around. She applied to the city's police academy, and she became a uniformed officer with the LAPD in 1983. Rutan later met Sherri, a graduate of Loma Linda University, who was on a fast-track career in critical nursing. She entered college at 16, and by her 20s was the director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, where she was giving presentations and teaching classes for fellow nurses. At one point, Lazarus threw Rutan a surprise party on his 25th birthday, unaware that he had been dating other women or that he had developed a serious relationship with Rasmussen. Now, when Stephanie learned that he was seriously involved with Sherri, Lazarus was despondent. "I'm truly in love with John, and the past year he has really torn me up." Stephanie had written to Rutan's mother in 1985. "I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll understand his decision." And in her own journal, she wrote, "I don't feel like working. I found out that John is getting married. Depressed, Stephanie visited Rutan at his condo, and the two had sex to give her closure. He testified 2 years later for what he says was the only time before Sherri's death that they had sex. Later that night, Lazarus awoke a fellow officer she roomed with to commiserate. Um, During their engagement, Stephanie bought her skis to the apartment Rutan shared with Sherri Rasmussen and asked him to wax them. And despite Sherri's objections, he complied. Sherri felt this was a little strange since Lazarus was dressed in flattering workout clothes, and after Stephanie left, his fiancée asked if their relationship was truly over. Rutan convinced her the two were just friends. A few days later, Stephanie returned to pick up the wax skis in uniform and armed after he left for work. Rasmussen was unnerved by these visits and pleaded with Rutan to tell Lazarus to stop coming. Rutan only said there was nothing to the relationship and that she should ignore Stephanie. According to Nels Rasmussen, Sherri's father, Lazarus later visited Sherri at her office to tell her that things were not over between her and John, and told Sherri, and I quote, "If I can't have John, no one else will." Shortly before her death, Sherri began to confide to her father her fear that Stephanie Lazarus was stalking her on the street. Rutan and Sherri were married in November of 1985. Now, this is where the crime takes place. On the morning of February 24th of 1986, Rutan left the couple's condominium to go to work. Sherri was scheduled to give a motivational speech at work that day, a managerial tactic that she didn't feel was very effective. To avoid it, she told him she might call in sick, using a back injury she had incurred when during an aerobics exercise. At 9:45 a.m., the neighbor noticed that the Rutan's garage door was open with no car visible. Approximately 15 minutes later, Rutan made the first of several unanswered phone calls home over the course of the day. Sherri's sister had also called without an answer. Then at 12 p.m., two men who the neighbor believed were gardeners in the compound gave her and her husband a purse they found that turned out to be Sherri's. A maid that was cleaning a nearby unit said she heard something that sounded like two people fighting and then something falling at 12:30 p.m. So, okay. When Rutan returned home in the evening, he found his garage door open and broken glass on the driveway. In addition, he discovered that the BMW that he bought Sherri for an engagement gift was missing. Because of her morning plans, he found it strange that she would have later gone out without letting him know. The house's answering machine had not been activated, and usually they activate it when they both, leave the house to go to work or whatever. Inside, he found Sherri dead on the living room floor, shot 3 times. There were signs of a struggle, a porcelain vase that had apparently been broken over her head prior to the shooting, a bloody handprint next to the burglar's alarm panic button, and a toppled credenza. I don't know what those are. It appeared that someone had at least attempted to bind Sherri at one point. She had defensive wounds and a bruise on her face that appeared to have been inflicted by the muzzle of a gun. The gun had been fired through a quilted blanket, apparently to muffle the sound. The investigating criminalist also observed a bite mark on Sherri's arm and took a swab from it. Now, the initial investigation was quickly concluded that Sherri had been surprised and killed by a burglar. Her attire, which was a bathrobe and a nightgown, suggested that she wasn't expecting visitors, although there was a maid in a neighboring unit that reported hearing screaming and fighting earlier in the day, but she didn't recall hearing gunshots. She thought the whole event had been a domestic dispute and didn't bother to call the police. Which I can understand that. If you don't hear the gunshot, but you just hear screaming and yelling, people can take that to mean, argument between a couple or, a domestic fight between, your partner or whatever. Now the maid, it appeared that the perpetrator had been in the process of taking electronic equipment when Sherri came upon them, and as a result, the jewelry had been left behind and the vehicle was taken as a getaway. Now, the abandoned BMW was recovered a week later. It yielded no new evidence. The only thing that appeared to have been taken from the home was the couple's marriage license. Now, to me, not knowing who the person is that committed the murder, that would give me pause. Because why would you take the marriage license when you're not taking anything else? Granted, they didn't get to take the electronics, but still, why would you just take the marriage license? The lead detective did consider other possibilities. He quickly ruled out Sherri's husband as a suspect. He quit his job and moved away from Los Angeles shortly after the murder. Sherri's father, Nels, and his wife Loretta told Mayer about Lazarus' harassment and that he had made a note of it. He later, Sherri's husband, later told the police that he and Rasmussen never discussed Lazarus. Which, in a way, I don't know if I want to say that that's bull. Because she's voiced her concerns to him before about Stephanie Lazarus. And he just told her to ignore it. So him saying that they never really discussed it, I don't know if that's just like, okay, he just tells her to ignore it and then just leaves it alone. Okay. I don't understand why he would just, I don't know. Regardless, the police remained focused on the possibility of a burglary, especially in light of one reported later in the same area, in which there were two suspects that had been reported that was carrying a gun like the one that had been fired, that had fired 3 bullets into Sherri, that were later identified by experts. Mayer's partner, Steve Hooks, found the bite mark unusual, as bites during struggles are much more commonly inflicted by women, while the majority of burglars are men. So but because men have bitten opponents during fights as well, the burglary theory stood out and just stayed. They didn't, kind of really basically didn't go and look for anything else. Now, this becomes a cold case. The suspected burglars to whom the detectives had ascribed the crime to remained at large, despite a follow-up story in a newspaper 8 months later and a reward offered by Sherri's family. The LAPD then became preoccupied with the violence resulting from gang wars and the crack epidemic that was plaguing the city at the time, and was unable to devote very much attention to the case. Detectives at the Van Nuys office were often helpful when the family called, unhelpful, excuse me, when the family called, hanging up or putting them on hold. A year after the murder, the family became frustrated and reiterated their offer at a press conference and called for more action. Sherri's father wrote to the then chief of police about the possibility that Stephanie Lazarus might have been involved. Detectives told him he watched too much television, and he continued to publicize the reward, and later worked with the short-lived television series Murder One, which I've never seen that one. I'm gonna have to look that up and see if I can watch that somewhere. Now, her father was convinced that Sherri, who had been 6 feet tall and had a large frame and was in good physical shape, had been the victim of a botched burglary. And whoever shot his daughter had fired directly into her chest at close range and had taken the trouble to muffle the shot with the quilt. So that would make sense. I mean, okay. So now, one of the detectives, Mayer, eventually retired, and there was a new detective assigned to the case and told Nels that he was unable to follow up on Mayer's notes and didn't think that any new leads that would emerge. Sherri's father was rebuffed again in 1993 when he offered to pay for the DNA testing on the evidence from the murder now that the technology was available. He was told that the police had to have a suspect in order to proceed. Stephanie briefly reunited with Bruton in 1989. Mayer's notes show that Bruton had called him and asked if he was absolutely sure there was no evidence linking Stephanie with his late wife's death. Now, I'm going to get into Stephanie Lazarus with you. Now, mind you, remember, she wasn't considered a suspect. But, then again, she kind of was, according to Sherri's father. Now, at the time of Sherri's murder, she had been on the force for 2 years as a patrol officer. She became involved with DARE, which is the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program. At one point, she even started her own private investigation company. And then after 20 years on the force, she been promoted to the high-profile, high-stakes art theft detail. But in 1986, she was working the streets. Now, the investigators had, like I said, had investigated the possibility that the crime had been a robbery. Sherri's car had been stolen. The BMW was just, found 2 miles away. Their hunch was reinforced by events that occurred just after Rasmussen's murder. Other than the car, the only other object taken was the couple's marriage license. Now, we cracked the cold case. Mr. Rasmussen's reports had been dismissed as products of viewing too much crime fiction. The LAPD working the case were now faced with an uncomfortable prospect. The DNA testing had revealed, now mind you, Sherri's father had been able to basically, there was a discovery that led to the new charges against Stephanie. And in 2009, the cold case squad, with time on its hand due to the dwindling murders in the area. They ran a DNA test on all the old evidence, including the bite mark on Sherri's body. The DNA testing revealed that the suspect had to be a woman, disposing of the linkage to the other robberies. At the time of the initial investigation, Stephanie Lazarus had been duly interviewed but never pursued as a suspect. So they started working the case. They were now faced with the uncomfortable prospect that a person who literally worked next door, because her department and the cold case department were basically right across the hall, was now their prime suspect. Now, can you imagine the cold case squad is sitting there, doing this investigation, and she's across the hall. Can you imagine the looks that she's getting? I mean, that to me just, I don't understand. Now, on June 5th, the announcement of the arrest of Stephanie in the 23-year-old case sent shock through the press and the LAPD. She had been sitting, in her third floor office when she was told that a suspect in custody in the jail might have information on one of her cases, and she went to check on the suspect. But to get through jail security, she had to surrender her weapon. And of course, it was a trap. Once disarmed, she was arrested. The announcement stunned the police department. She had been described as bubbly, vicarious, and a story about her private investigation firm now there are new details in this trial, there's new details in the trial, or in the case and in the trial. Sorry, it's been one of those days. Now, after her arrest, one key piece to the puzzle that was missing, the gun that was used to shoot Sherri, and 3 times in the chest. Now, the LA Times reported that Stephanie Lazarus had called the St. Monica Police Department a few weeks after the murder to report that her car had been broken into. She reported a stolen gym bag, money, clothes, and her .38 caliber handgun. The two departments never put two and two together, which I can understand. I mean, I get it. Now, in all of this, now mind you, she got married again and adopted a daughter with her new husband. And she became an instructor at the police academy. Which I okay. Where was I? All right, there. 23 years later, the break-ins look like a cover-up, and now the police believe that she ditched the gun in the Pacific Ocean. Okay. The scene was more gruesome than was originally revealed at the beginning of the case, at the start of the investigation. Sherri's head had been bludgeoned. She had wounds on her wrists that indicated that she had been tied up. A robe lay on the floor nearby that had bullet holes in them, and it appeared that the killer had used those to muffle the shots. The slaying might have been averted if the maid that had been working nearby, who had heard the screams, would have called the police. But then again, I understand. I kind of get it on one hand, why the maid didn't. Because, well, what if it was just a yelling argument between husband and wife or whatever? But then again, on the erring on the side of caution, it could blossom into something worse, if that makes any sense. And it's kind of one of those, damned if you're doing, you damned if you don't things. Now she had been apprehended even earlier. Could have been apprehended even earlier. The DNA had been proven to be a woman's in 2005, but the original suspects were male. And then in February, the investigators realized the mistake, and then a secret investigation had kind of launched. And I guess that's how they, kind of, I just, okay. Now, May 11th, or let's see, June 9th of 2009, she found Stephanie appeared in court. She answered. I guess apparently she was trying to get a continuance for her trial. Then on March 9th, 2012, she was found guilty for the first-degree murder. Testimony heard prior to the sentencing. John Bruton said, and I quote, "The fact that Sherri's death occurred because she met and married me brings me to my knees." On May 11th, Lazarus was sentenced to 27 years in prison with credit for time served. She will be eligible for parole, in 22 years. Sorry. Now, on May 11th, Stephanie Lazarus was sentenced. Friday was sentenced to 27 years to life. The prosecutor said that she misused her police training in the most profound imaginable way, and then her narcissism led her to kill and continues to motivate her denial of responsibility. She refuses to take responsibility for her actions. I don't understand, but, now, May 12th, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm just trying to now there's an interview, and I'm going to read this. This is between a detective and Stephanie Lazarus. The detective: "Do you know John Bruton?" Stephanie: "Yes. I mean, we dated. What is this all about?" The detective: "Well, it's relating to his wife." Stephanie: "Okay." The detective asks, "Did you know her?" Stephanie says, "Not really." The detective says, "Did you ever meet her?" Stephanie says, "I don't know." The detective says, "You dated John. How long did you guys date?" Stephanie then says, "I mean, why are you guys, is this something, you said it was going to be an interview about art. I don't understand why you're talking about some guy I dated a million years ago." The detective says, "Well, do you know what happened to his wife?" Stephanie says, "Yeah, I know she got killed." The detective then asks, "Have you ever met his wife?" Well, one of the current concerns I've had is we're looking at some of the notes, and some of Sherri's friends said that you and her were having a problem because of the John situation, and words were exchanged, and it's all relating to John. Stephanie answers, "You know what? I just can't say." The detective says, "You can't say?" Stephanie says, "No, that doesn't even ring a bell." Finally, an hour into the interrogation, detectives get down to the tough questions. The detective asks her, "Did you ever fight with her?" Stephanie says, "You mean like we fought?" "Did you ever duke it out with her?" "No, I don't think so." The detective says, "You remember that, right?" Stephanie says, "Yeah, I would think so." Now by this time, Stephanie Lazarus really has some kind of an idea of what's going on. And this is all from Stephanie. Stephanie Lazarus says, "I mean, if you guys are claiming I'm a suspect, then you know I got a problem with that. I'm shocked. I'm really shocked that someone would blame saying that I did this. I mean, we had a fight, and so I went and killed her? I mean, come on." Detective Lazarus walks out, only to be arrested and handcuffed, and she's brought back to read her Miranda rights. On June 5th, 2009, more than 2 decades after her death, Detective Stephanie Lazarus was charged with first-degree murder. So, it just... My thing is, why... Even after she's been convicted, she still won't take responsibility, which I think is kind of crazy, because it just makes, by the time she realizes, okay, she's been caught, but she still, wants to go there. Now, what I found interesting was, they what I found interesting is that she never really had any kind of like remorse through the whole thing, even when she was being questioned. I mean, you guys could tell in the interview, part of the interview that she had that I read, she didn't have any kind of remorse whatsoever. It was just like she just, acted like she hadn't seen John Bruton in like forever. And then, it just, to me, it was just like, okay, really? And it's kind of sad when things like that happen. I mean, this was crazy. I mean, a love triangle that just went completely, totally wrong. And, it just... Now, what I also found interesting, that during all of this, there was a employee that she found that after finding that the DNA from the bite belonged to a woman, her LAPD detective supervising her verbally steered her away from Stephanie Lazarus as a suspect without naming her. She filed a lawsuit against the city, and apparently, now, which I also, this was one of the things I found interesting, that according to Jennifer Francis, Sherri's case was not the only case that she believed that DNA evidence was being purposely ignored. And she was told, we're not going there. And there was there was DNA that was found on a victim that was to believe been killed by the Hillside Strangler, and instead she was a victim of another serial killer, Rodney Alcala, and it just, there's a lot of things that I get. To me, it sounds, and I mean, I didn't realize this until, earlier or last night. It sounds to me like the police kind of already figured it out in the first investigation that Stephanie Lazarus may have had something to do with this, but didn't want excuse me, to pursue it because, number one, she was a cop. And now this is just my opinion. That, number one, she was a cop, and they just didn't want to go there. But my opinion is, it doesn't matter. You're a cop or you're not. You kill somebody, okay, then you get arrested for it. And you have to pay the consequences. I mean, that's just my opinion. Now, Stephanie Lazarus has filed an appeal. Of course, they're all allowed to. And, of course, that appeal, I do believe, was, overruled. But, yes, they upheld her conviction, and so now she is spending time in prison in California. And this case just really, really, it was just like, I was totally like surprised. I mean, I get it. This is one of the things this is what this is my opinion. I look at it like this. I always, I look up to police officers. I teach my kids to do the same thing. But then again, it's like I've always been told, you get that one rotten apple in a whole bushel of apples. So it's kind of sad when you have to, really go there with police officers. So anyhow, that's it, guys. That is all I have for tonight, or today, excuse me. And thank you for watching. I really, really appreciate it. And next week, like I told you guys yesterday in my floss tube video, now that I've done a little more research and have figured out how to do more research, hopefully the videos will be a little better than what they were before. So until next time, guys, thank you for watching. If you like my video, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. And until then, guys, have a great week.